from the College by the Lake, Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Local, regional, national, and international guests discussing the issues and topics affecting the way you live are on Forum, the North Idaho College Public Forum, with your host and moderator, political scientist Tony Stewart.
Our topic today is entitled The Problem of Declining Immunizations and Children's Diseases. We've been doing this program for a long time, and this is the first time we've dealt with this very important topic, and we are most pleased to be able to deal with this topic in the sense that we would like to be helpful to our viewers. We have three guests today who are very well qualified to address this question. I welcome all of you to the program. Thank you for taking time to discuss a very important issue to help the people in our audience with children and what they could do in relation to this question. First of all, Linda Scott, who is from Spokane, Washington, and is with Polio Outreach. We are happy to have you, Linda. Thank you for sharing with us today. And next to her is Phyllis Allaby, who is a registered nurse. She is the immunization coordinator for the Idaho Panhandle Health District. And again, Phyllis, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
And our third guest is Alice Anderson. She is a visitor volunteer or immunization educator for the Idaho Panhandle Health District. And we thank you too, Alice, for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
We have a number of questions that we would like to share with you, and then you in turn with our viewers on your answers. And as always, I'm most pleased to have our regular panel. First of all is Janelle Burke, who's an attorney in the state of Idaho, and next to her is Steve Schenck, who is the Dean of College Relations and Development at North Idaho College. And I shall ask Janelle to commence today's questioning.
My first question will be for Phyllis, and I want to have just a bit of background to share with our viewers about the history of immunizations in the United States, childhood immunizations in particular.
Okay. Probably our first vaccine that was widely used in the United States, or in the world for that matter, was smallpox vaccine. And in fact, the extensive use of that vaccine enabled us to stop using that a number of years ago, because smallpox has now is considered to be eradicated worldwide. After that, we had tetanus, diphtheria, pertussis. In the late 50s, early 60s, we came along with polio vaccine and measles vaccine, mumps and rubella. The most recent vaccines that we now have is Haemophilus influenza B, which you commonly may have heard of as Hib, which causes meningitis. Hepatitis B has come along in the last 10 or so years, and now just the newest one is hepatitis A and varicella, which is chickenpox.
And Alice, what are some of the reasons why children should be immunized en masse?
En masse. Well, by far the risks from the diseases outweigh the very, very minimal risks from vaccinations. And before the advent of vaccines, we saw things like for every 1,000 cases of pertussis, which is whooping cough, we had, I forgot my statistic, for every 1,000 cases there would be one death. Now, okay, now if we look at the high risk, or if we look at a risk from the vaccine, only 1 in 100,000 might have a severe reaction. So the parent has to look at the two factors and decide, should I immunize or should I not immunize? But the risk from the disease is far greater than the risk from the vaccine.
And of course, if many children are vaccinated, then it's going to cut down on the risk to the whole group again.
To the entire population. That's correct. And what we see with declining rates is we see things like pertussis coming back. Pertussis, as I said, was whooping cough. And last year in North Idaho, we had 180 cases of pertussis. We saw numerous children in intensive care wards. We didn't lose any children. In 1993, though, the statistics from the CDC, we had 6,000 cases of pertussis nationwide. 1 in 500 of those, in every 500 cases, one child died. We had 12 deaths.
Now, Linda, you can tell us, maybe personally, what it means and why you think that kind of thing is a good thing to do.
Well, definitely, if I were a mother today, I certainly would want to immunize my child against polio because I had polio as a child, and now as an adult, I have what is called postpolio syndrome.
And what is that?
It is the symptoms of late effects of polio. When the virus was in the body, when it was active as the disease, I like to describe it as it sat down somewhere along our nervous system, down the spinal cord. Wherever the virus sat down, it did damage. And today, even though we lived, for the most part, normal lives because we recovered from most of that damage, today we have weaknesses wherever that damage took place. So it could be new muscles that are damaged now because of overuse, or it could be from the original virus.
Steve Sheen.
I want to ask sort of a cover the waterfront question, and I hope it isn't going to be tedious, but if our goal today is to inform people about the dangers of communicable diseases and the benefits of immunization, then it seems to me we at some point ought to talk a little bit about what those diseases are for which an effective immunization is available. And I'm going to ask that as sort of a group question. So if you could briefly describe those diseases and the immunization that's available, how it's administered, and kind of cover the waterfront of what's out there, I'd appreciate that.
Let me talk about pertussis.
Okay.
I'll talk about pertussis, which I said is whooping cough.
Mm-hmm.
It's most severe in children under a year of age. They get an extremely violent cough with whooping cough. They cough to the point where they can't, it's like they can't get a breath. We have a video at the health district that shows a child with pertussis. The mucus is coming out of their nostrils. They're fighting for air. I think one thing the nurse at Sacred Heart who took care of some of the kids last year said, she said if the mothers worry because the child had a mild reaction, such as a sore arm or a fever, she said they shouldn't worry about that. They should worry when I get them, the child cannot cry. They can't get enough breath to cry.
And the immunization, is it a shot or a pill, and at what age should it be administered?
Okay, with pertussis, they receive their first vaccination at age 2 months.
Okay. Are there follow-ups, or
yes,
is there one?
Yes,
Okay.
there are follow-ups. They receive one at 2 months. If they're on schedule, 4 months, 6 months. I'm going to defer to Phyllis after this on the schedule.
And the fourth one is between age 12 to 15 months, and then they get a booster before they go to school.
And if we could, Tony, if you agree that's valuable, let's just keep going through the list. Maybe we could ask Linda to tell us what the immunization schedule is for polio.
I think polio is very similar to what Phyllis was stating because it is part of the collective vaccinations that they begin at 2 months.
Right.
And just recently, I think some of the viewers may have seen in the news that the CDC has now recommended
CDC, Center for
Disease Control, right.
They've in Atlanta, Georgia.
In Atlanta, that's right. They have now recommended, and to be in place by 1997, that the polio vaccine be done on a different schedule with a different type. Currently, frequently the young child receives the live vaccine or the oral vaccine, and there are certain risks involved with that. And so they're now recommending that the first 2 shots for the immunization be with the dead vaccine and follow it up when the child is older with the live vaccine.
I see, thank you. Other diseases while we're on this?
Other diseases are diphtheria and tetanus, and those 2 vaccines are combined with the pertussis vaccine. So they have the DTP, that's diphtheria, tetanus, pertussis, at 2, 4, 6 months, 12 to 15 months, and then their school booster. They have the polio at the same time. They have the Hib vaccine, which is Haemophilus influenza B, on that same schedule also, with the exception that they don't receive a booster at school age. Measles, mumps, and rubella is now given between 12 and 15 months of age, and then a booster either when they enter school or when they're 12 years old, or certainly by the time they enter college. Medically, it's appropriate to have that second MMR at any age. It's just that those ages that I mentioned, preschool, junior high, or college are good times to catch them and get that done.
And is that pretty much the list?
Hepatitis B is now being given to infants right along with their other series, 2, 4, and 6 months. It may even be started at birth and have their first dose in the hospital. So some hospitals are doing that, some aren't. But they can start it whenever they're available at their provider for any other vaccines. And then we now have varicella, which is chickenpox, and hepatitis A. Those two have not been, at this point, included in the routine childhood immunizations. They are available, though, and I certainly recommend hepatitis A vaccine to anybody of any age, especially if you're planning to travel, because hepatitis A is on the increase and it's very prevalent everywhere.
And Tony, if I may, while we're going through this list, I know it isn't primarily aimed at young children, but and I'm assuming you mentioned in the Hib vaccination, influenza B, that is not the same thing as the flu vaccines that are recommended for elderly people, or?
No, it is not. That's it. The name of the virus is Haemophilus influenza B, but it is not the flu virus that causes the upper respiratory that adults or anybody can get. Hib is a disease that about 60% of the children who get Hib disease can have meningitis. And probably about 60% of those children who survive meningitis have some sort of long-lasting complication. So it's a serious disease, and probably of all the vaccines we have fewer side effects of any of them, and it's extremely effective.
Do you recommend the kind of flu shots that senior citizens usually receive for young children, or is that unnecessary?
Children do not generally need flu shots unless they have some illness or underlying chronic disease such as diabetes, heart, lung, or kidney disease. Those are just a few examples, which would put them at greater risk for complications if they got flu. So flu vaccine is not recommended just routinely for every child.
Thank you.
Linda, we have viewers in many states and in parts of Canada, and we asked you to bring some numbers, and we're going to put those on the screen now. Okay. We have 3 numbers we want to go through, and we're trying to be helpful to our viewers to be able to contact these numbers and outreach in different ways. The first number going up on the screen is going to be described as polio outreach. Would you describe what that is, and when the number has now gone up on the screen, and it is in Spokane? Would you explain that to us?
Yes, Polio Outreach of Spokane is a support group for polio survivors, their family, friends, interested persons, including medical professionals that would like to learn a little bit more about post-polio syndrome. We meet once a month, that's the 4th Tuesday of the month, at the Shriners Hospital, which is a very appropriate place for us to meet. And they have a lovely auditorium on the top floor, and we gather there at 6 p.m.
Thank you. The second number that's going to go up on the screen is called the Gazette International, and that's beyond our region and so forth. Would you explain how that is helpful to individuals?
Yes. Gazette International is the international support group for polio survivors. They're also a referral association. So if you're living outside the greater Coeur d'Alene, Spokane, North Idaho, Eastern Washington area, give them a call. They will check where the closest support group is to you and who to get in contact with for more information.
And they're headquartered in St. Louis, Missouri.
Correct.
And then the third one that we're going to address is the post-polio information. This is the email number that's gone on the screen.
Yes, that goes to a member of our polio outreach group in Spokane on America Online, and they gather every Tuesday evening to talk about post-polio syndrome through the internet. But if any of your viewers are on the internet now, David accepts email at any time, and he'll be glad to give any of the people who inquire information on post-polio syndrome.
Well, that's very helpful. We thank you. Phyllis, while I have my round of questioning too, we have prepared a bar graph that you brought earlier, and I wish, as we look at it on the screen, it'll be coming up on the screen in a moment, the bars go up at a certain point. You dropped it in the floor, I think, there. But anyway,
Okay.
It shows height and then lowering of the amount of immunization. Explain to us, and this is for the state of Idaho, I believe. It's gone up on the screen now.
That's correct.
And would you explain?
Well, that bar graph covers a period of time, I believe, from 1984 through 1994. And you can see there that our immunization rates in 1984 were about, I think, I don't have that right in front of me, about 70%. And they just increased steadily and then began to drop down to now it's just a little over 50%.
Yeah, I can see on the bar graph for 1994.
And
it has really come down.
Yes, and what that represents is the number of children who are up to date at age 2 years of age. And the reason that is important is because children are much more vulnerable to the disease and to complications of the disease when they're infants and younger. As they get older, it doesn't mean that they can't get the disease. It means that complications from those diseases or the disease may not be quite so serious. So that's why we really want to focus on getting children properly immunized by the time they're 2 years old.
I have before me a publication from the Kiwanis International, and they've done a lot of work in this area. And they quote President Bill Clinton when he said, and I quote, "Unfortunately, many children don't receive immunization as soon as they should. More than half of the preschool children in some urban areas lack protection. And these childhood diseases can result in lifetime disability, disfigurement, and even death," end of quote. So he is echoing what you're saying, Phyllis, and I would ask Alice, based upon this statement and some other information I have for you, what are you and others doing to try to encourage parents to have that bar graph to go back up? And you have something called the Ever Child by Two program. Would you explain that? And I assume you're in agreement with the President's concern about what is happening.
I am in agreement with the concern. Every Child by Two is a national campaign. It's headed by Betty Bumpers and Rosalind Carter. And they travel to all the states, and they will be coming to Idaho in November, November 13th and 14th. In our area, Betty Bumpers for sure has confirmed she'll be in the Kellogg area on the 14th of November to a recognition of the Silver Valley's effort called All Their Shots While They're Tots. The reason she's recognizing that effort is Silver Valley has improved their rates by 17% in the last year, so we're very proud of them. Another program, myself, I'm part of the effort to raise rates as a VISTA volunteer, where there's 15 VISTA volunteers working in Idaho, 2 in the Panhandle. One program that we have started and we're very excited about, it's getting off the ground this week, is called Baby Track. And it's a partnership between the Health District, Kootenai Medical Center, and RSVP, which is Retired Senior Volunteer Program. And each mother who consents when her child is born to participate in the program will be matched with a senior volunteer who will give her a phone call reminder and a postcard each time her child is due for shots.
So this program is really all across the country. Now, this program won't air until after those dates you gave, but thank you for doing that. Janelle Burke.
I wanted to follow up on that and ask a question with regard to keeping track. How do you suggest that young mothers and fathers keep track of when their children need immunizations? It seems like you're throwing out a lot of different dates, 1 month, 2 months, and so forth. How do we keep track of what we need to do when?
Well, I think it's important for parents to ask for a record. At the Health District, we always give a record, and I think most physicians do. And then we also give them a reminder card, a written reminder of when the next shot is due. Most immunization providers have some sort of tracking and recall system that's computerized where it'll pop out a reminder card at a specific time. Also, I just tell parents to, when they get home that day, flip the calendar up 2 months or whenever it is and write it in there then. And it's easier to do it that way. And that record is important to keep in a safe place or where they know where it is, and to bring the record back each time their child has immunizations, regardless of where they go for their shots. We have in our community here, and I think this is probably true everywhere, that children have multiple providers. they'll perhaps have their first shot at the doctor's office and maybe have their second one at the health district and that kind of thing. So they have the complete record.
Alice, are there places that people who can't afford can go for care?
Yes, there are. The health district has a policy that they do not deny childhood immunizations to anyone who cannot afford them. The fees at the health district are on a sliding fee scale.
Now that's in Idaho, but probably there are similar kinds of programs other
Similar
places.
programs, I believe, in each state through the health districts.
So there are usually programs that you can do that with, and people should not feel afraid to go to take their child because of the cost. Is
Of the
that correct?
cost. That's true. And the other thing is the Vaccines for Children's program, which is providing vaccines to the states, has made those vaccines available now to the private providers, and many of those providers are taking advantage of that, and they are able to offer vaccines for a lower cost than they have in the past.
Now, Linda, one of the things that we talked with about before the show was the fact that sometimes when people look at you, you look like you're a healthy specimen. And can you talk with our viewers some about how it feels, perhaps, to be a person who is suffering from the after effects of a disease that there is a vaccine for now?
Certainly, and it would have been nice if the vaccine had been before 1947, because I had polio in 1947, and I recovered. Nothing on my body showed that I had had polio, and my body didn't begin to change until in 1990, when I couldn't do what I was doing before. My job required lifting, and I found that I couldn't lift the weight. I couldn't stand as long as I used to be able to. I couldn't walk the distances required, and I still looked well. No part of me looked ill. And sometimes it's hard to get a medical professional or even your family to understand that you do not feel well, and you understand that your body is just no longer functioning properly. And so when my first trip into the physician, I was told, well, you're middle-aged, my dear, and sometimes things just don't go so well. And I thought, this isn't going to work, because there was something wrong. And it took 5 doctors before I found one who knew to ask me if I had had polio, because I didn't know to say to any of those physicians, I am a polio survivor. And I'm hopeful that any survivors that are watching this program will say, I am a polio survivor, to their medical professional the next time they go in. And back to the visible part, I use a scooter for walking of any distance, and people look at me and, oh, you know, you look all right, you really need the scooter. Yes, I do, because I can only walk just a very short distance before the muscles in my legs become too weak to hold me up, and it's time to sit down. And the scooter enables me to go to the fair, go shopping, go do a lot of things that I used to do. And anyone out there that is still, you know, looking good and not feeling well, don't hide it. Speak up about it.
Steve Sheen.
Well, I think maybe Linda has opened a subject that we could pursue profitably. We know that not everyone that should is immunizing their children. We know that they can do that for free. So maybe we need to scare them just a little bit and talk about some of the consequences of not immunizing children. I mean, and perhaps it would be best to start with the diseases that when I was a child you just got. Measles and mumps, for instance. Why is it necessary for people to get those immunizations, and what happens if they don't, or what could happen?
Well, for measles, for instance, in 1989-91 epidemic that we had in this country, we had 11,000 people hospitalized. Now, if you don't even count the illness, the financial cost of that is tremendous. 1 in 3,000 deaths during that time. So people still can die from measles. And even if you don't die and you don't end up in an ICU unit, you can still have complications such as deafness, encephalitis, and some of those things that are going to be with you for the rest of your life. So the diseases are very serious diseases.
Others as well, whooping cough or tetanus or hepatitis. What are some of the worst case scenarios that can result from those diseases?
Well, once again, death is the worst. Encephalopathy, seizures, pneumonia, and then the complications of pneumonia in the case of pertussis, for instance. Before vaccine, we had 1 in every 1,000 cases resulted in death. And we mentioned in District 1, North Idaho, just last fall through, I think, November, beginning in about November and peaking and ending in January or spring, we had 180 cases of pertussis. And right now, we have cases of pertussis happening in Kootenai County.
Alice, maybe you could share with us from an educator's point of view what you think the most significant barriers are to immunization, why people don't immunize their children?
Well, it's interesting because one of the great successes of public health has been the vaccination programs. And since they've been so successful, people no longer fear the diseases. They haven't seen the diseases. Today's young parents aren't bad parents, but they have not seen polio. They don't have a friend who had polio, such as people my age, knew people who had polio. We saw the effects of the diseases. So that's a big factor. We have many two families where we have a single parent or we have both parents working, and it makes it more difficult for them to get in to the clinic hours. When you couple that especially with the fact that the child care provider can't bring the child in. So we have to look for ways to remove those barriers and make it easier for the parents to get in. But I think the most significant thing is that lack of urgency that the parents are feeling.
I have a question. We have less than 2 minutes, and mine's for Phyllis. Do you hear from other states or other countries that the trend we've shown here it's happening? And if we don't get the immunizations back up, can we expect to see some reoccurrences, what Alice is talking about, and an unfortunate rise in these diseases and death and disabilities?
Yes, as a matter of fact, polio is one of the diseases that we fully hoped and expected to have eradicated worldwide. And we came close to that mark, but now, as an example, in Chechnya.
I'm going to have to interrupt. I got the signal we're out of time. I'm so sorry we're out of time. On behalf of our panel and our staff, we thank all three of you for being here. It's been most informative, and good luck in your work.
You bet.
Ladies and gentlemen, we've been discussing the problem of declining immunizations and children's diseases, and we hope you have found this as informative as we have. And we invite you to be with us again next week at this same time, and we will discuss yet another important issue. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
The North Idaho College Public Forum was videotaped live from the studios of Instructional Technology on the campus of North Idaho College for viewing at this more appropriate time. We invite you to join us again next week for another all-new edition of the North Idaho College Public Forum on this public television station.